Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Brittany. Brittany, did you want to say something else? No.
No, he just had said Brittany, so and I think he meant Emily, and so
I
I
know,
was
I
like,
meant
oh,
Emily. Sorry about that. Turn over to Emily.
please, Emily, take a
Thank you so much for that welcome. And thank you all for being here today to talk about anti-racist international education. My name is Emily Meadows. My pronouns are she, her. And yes, I'm an educational consultant. I work specifically in gender and sexual diversity inclusion. But as I'll explain later, that work has also brought me to anti-racist education. I've worked with organizations such as the American Psychological Association, the Fulbright Commission, the Truman Group, New England Association of Schools and Colleges as a consultant. I also teach at the George Washington University Graduate Program of Health Policy and Practice for LGBT people. But my training originally was as a school counselor, and I have many years experience working in schools in that role, including at the American School of Kuwait. And I actually do see some faces from there, and most recently at Hong Kong International School, and I'm now in The Hague. And also, I don't know everyone in the group, but as a student, I was at the American School of Paris and also the Anglo-American School of Moscow. So I am very truly at home in the international school community. As I said, my work brought me here because I do work on inclusion and equity for LGBTQ students, but it's difficult to work on one area of equity without sort of bumping into others. This is Kimberly Crenshaw. She is a person whose writing has really inspired me. And she coined the term intersectionality quite a long time ago, over 30 years ago now. But it's in the past 5 years or so really become more spotlighted in academia and in education as well. Her definition is that intersectionality is a prism for seeing the way in which various forms of inequity often operate together and exacerbate each other. So we cannot look at just LGBTQ inclusion as a silo. We always are looking at layers of marginalization and how they impact one another. And so I want to also acknowledge that I'm extremely humbled to be invited to speak today. I am white, and I completely acknowledge that I am taking up space in a really important conversation. I'm using this time today to mostly speak to the role of white people and white accountability and our responsibility in correcting racism in international schools. So I do not speak for people of color, but I'm trying to continue to open up that conversation for white people as well. It is our job to be part of it. In 2018, Brett Kavanaugh was nominated for a seat on the Supreme Court of the United States, but before being confirmed, he was accused of sexual assault and called before Congress to testify. Some of you may have followed this in the American media. A good deal of his defense stood on the grounds that he is essentially a good person. So they brought up his record as a judge, his family man persona, and called on others to testify to his character. And the idea is that since Kavanaugh has been and therefore incapable of the crime he was accused of. And this plays on a longstanding myth that people are divisible into two distinct categories, good or bad. However, we are far more complex as humans and people, and those we have seen be generous and humane and caring can also do cruel and careless and selfish things. But we perpetuate this myth of the good-bad binary, and we tend to think of ourselves generally as good people, good educators, and therefore we reject negative descriptors such as racist because they just don't align with our self-perception as being in the good category. We see racist as conscientiously, intentionally malicious to people of color. And that, as us good white people, we dismiss that description of ourselves. And so we dismiss our role in racist systems. However, the truth is that we can do many wonderful things as educators and also simultaneously be perpetuating racism. It's not a binary. In fact, most of us, virtually all of us, do this. I know I certainly do. So this is awfully uncomfortable to talk about. We don't like to think of ourselves as perpetuating racism, especially in our professional practice where we care about what we're doing. And so we have very little practice talking about race. We try to avoid it if we can, and it can bring up a lot of uncomfortable feelings when we do. So we might feel defensive about being accused of being racist or of perpetuating racism. We might be fearful of conflict or saying the wrong thing. We might feel ashamed of our role in reinforcing racism, or helpless about not knowing how to solve this really big problem. And so to escape this discomfort, it's very common to either avoid the topic of race altogether, very common, or to look for evidence or excuses that we are ourselves not racist. So we externalize the problem. We may acknowledge that racism exists, but we tend to see ourselves as unique and exceptional and not racist. So international schools, it's a funny little bit of a problem because international schools actually are quite exceptional and unique in many ways. We're not tied to one culture or one school system or one way of thinking necessarily. We are kind of little bubbles, and we call ourselves bubbles as international schools. And so it's very convenient to use that as an excuse to say, again, we externalize the problem. Other schools are racist, other places might be racist, but we aren't. We are exceptional. And so we use this kind of feel-good narrative by talking about how we celebrate International Day, or we acknowledge different religious festivals. We have in our mission statements celebrating diversity and global citizens. We have students of color in our student bodies, or we may scapegoat of the local culture and say, you know, it's not my culture, that's just how they do things here. And so we have this whole backpack of excuses to say, as international schools, the racist problem doesn't apply to us. But in fact, when it comes to racism, international schools are not exceptional. We are very much a part of the problem, as much as anywhere else. And I saw that there are a lot of people coming in from different parts of the world, and I do feel confident saying that regardless of what school we are working at, it is everywhere. At my school, you say, but I've never seen it. While inequity tends to be invisible to people in positions of social dominance, it is vividly discernible to non-dominant groups. So if you feel you haven't seen racism in your school, I'm guessing you're probably white. So I'll ask you to consider, what does your home smell like? I have definitely walked into other people's homes and been able to smell them. If there's pets, for example, that's why I have this cute dog. And I can distinctly notice different smells in different spaces. But I couldn't tell you what my home smells like. It doesn't smell like anything to me. Because we can become desensitized to smells when we're exposed to them over and over again. They become so normalized that they don't even smell like anything to us anymore. And racism is so normalized that white people, we often do not even notice it. It's happening all around us. White people, we can go all day without even thinking about race, even though metaphorically it is everywhere and it smells. Now, when we see horrific acts of violence, and those are televised, we know that's racist. But there are so many more types of racism happening where we are, which are just as harmful, but we don't always recognize them as racism because we're used to them, and because they may be perpetuated by people that we like, including ourselves. So white desensitization to racism allows us to continue to feel comfortable in our homes and in our schools while participating in and benefiting from systems of racism. Making these systems invisible also makes us more likely to feel exempt from the responsibility of disrupting them. I don't have to clean it up if I can't see it, or if I can't smell it in this case. The metaphor isn't perfect, obviously, because the dog is adorable and racism is not, but you get the idea. So the antidote to this is to acknowledge this is the case. We have to be able to acknowledge that there is racism all around us, and we need to be able to start sniffing it out, if you will, so we can clean it up. We need to look for it and not wait for it to show it, to reveal itself somehow. To uncover racism, we have to be able to see marginalization. So marginalization is to marginalize is to relegate to an unimportant or powerless position within a society or group. So it's to literally relegate to the social margins. And different pieces of our identity can be factors for marginalization. So race is one of them that we're talking about today. It may also be education, sexuality, ability, age, gender, ethnicity, culture, language, class. This is by no means a complete picture. If people have others they want to type into the chat, please feel free, because this is just a snapshot of some of the very common ways that people are marginalized. But there are certainly more, and it can also be contextual. Like I've worked with some people from India who were talking about colorism really specifically, and the intersection of colorism and caste and language in India, which is not an area I'm really familiar with, but that can be extremely powerful depending on where you are. So I also want to clarify that marginalization is based on historical and systemic treatment and positioning in society. So it's consistent and it applies to a group as a whole, not one person, one time. So for example, a white person who applies for a job and learns that the organization instead hired a person of color who was also qualified because they were looking to diversify the perspectives and experiences in their workplace, would not be an example of marginalization. They are not a victim of marginalization because white people generally are not restricted from employment opportunities or otherwise systemically marginalized based upon their race. So if everyone is clear on marginalization, and feel free to interrupt me if not, I want to do a short activity. So I'm going to ask each of you to take a look at this graphic and consider in your context what ways that you might have experienced marginalization. What elements of your identity contribute to marginalization? If you have, try to aim for 3 if you can. Some that are not up here might be religion, gender identity, so they've put gender but not gender identity. Gender expression is also not up here. Nationality, I think, is not up here. Yeah. So thinking about the ways that you experience marginalization or elements of your identity which subject you to marginalization, you can put it on a Google Doc or just write on a piece of paper or type it into your phone, wherever. You don't need to share it with the whole group, but to reflect on that, and I'll give you about a minute. Okay. I'm going to put that to the side for just a moment. We'll come back to it. But on the flip side of the coin of marginalization is privilege. Peggy, so, privilege is defined as a special right, advantage, or immunity granted or available only to a particular person or group. Peggy McIntosh wrote an essay called Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack, where she lists 50 various forms of privilege that she carries with her daily, simply by virtue of being white. So she says, for example, I can be sure that my children will be given curricular materials that testify to the existence of their race. Or I can worry about racism without being seen as self-interested or self-serving. And it's called the invisible knapsack because she has to kind of come out and acknowledge those elements of her privileged status. We as white people often tend to forget and take for granted that these are privileges that not everyone has. Whereas people who are marginalized are often not able to forget about their marginalized status and are certainly not desensitized to it in the same way that white people are, or people in a privileged position. So I'm going to go back to the graphic. And looking at this, or again, using other elements that are not on here, I'd like you to think about the ways that you experience privilege, elements of your identity that grant you privilege. Again, try to aim for at least 3 and jot those down. Okay. So we're going to move into breakout rooms shortly and do a group activity. So what I'll have you do is, there's 3 initial steps. So I'll have everyone introduce themselves in your group. It's going to be small groups of about 3. Share your pronouns if you're comfortable, where you are currently located, and your connection to international education, if any. If you're not in international ed, that's perfectly fine. This activity is applicable for all of us. And then share one element of marginalization that you carry. This is optional. I'm not in the groups to, sort of facilitate and be part of this. So if you're not comfortable sharing your marginalization, that's okay too. And then also to share one element of privilege that you benefit from, if you're comfortable doing that. And once everybody in the group has had a chance to do all 3 of the first prompts, then there's a bonus question if you have time to think about which one of the exercises, privilege or marginalization, was more difficult for you, and if so, why you think that is. What I have done in the chat is put a link to a Google Doc, which has the slides, so you will have this prompt when you go to your breakout rooms, because if you haven't done breakout rooms before, you can't see the main screen anymore. So this way, if you open this up in a tab on your computer, you won't have to try to remember what it said. And we will do this, let's see, if we give it about, if we give this about 13 minutes, that should give everyone a chance to share theirs and even maybe get to the bonus question. And then what happens is at the end, about 60 seconds before, you'll get a little warning and it will say you're being called back. So you'll come back to the main room. So there's nothing you need to do except you will accept your invitation into your breakout room. And once you're there, if you're comfortable, please do turn on your camera if you don't already have it on so that your group members can see you. If you have questions during the activity, you can leave your breakout room and come back to the main room where Kevin and I will be, and then Kevin can put you back in your breakout room, so you won't be stuck if you leave. Does anyone have a question or anything before we move into the rooms? Okay. So yeah, we'll give it about 13 minutes, should hopefully be enough for everyone. Go ahead, Kevin, whenever you're ready.
All right, breakout rooms are now open.
Moments of privilege and marginalization that exist all around us. So it's sort of that working on noticing and not staying desensitized to it. And also to practice talking about it. So, we said this can be challenging to talk about, and this gives us a space where it's designed for that. It's fairly controlled. You're with other adult professionals, and having more practice will hopefully make it easier for you to be more effective when advocating, for example, with your principal, or when facilitating a discussion with students about race, if you've already sort of had some experience. So in terms of application of all of this content, we've been fairly theoretical to this point. And in terms of application, I want you to think about the lenses that we wear. So with those different elements of our identity, we sort of have our own unique lenses. But if you're looking at the world through the lens of a white person, we sort of take for granted that lens is neutral. We think of it as a neutral lens. So if you consider, for example, we neutralize whiteness, we make it the norm in lots of areas. So if you consider the example of ethnic food, when we say ethnic food, we're talking about food generally eaten in places where people of color live, as compared to food, which is what we often think of as what white people eat. And if you consider the example of identity politics are politics that are considered to be in service of marginalized groups, women's politics, or people of color politics. Those are identity politics versus just politics, which are what white men think about. So we take for granted a white lens as a neutral lens, but it isn't neutral. It's a white lens. We're just so used to it. We don't notice that we're wearing it. And we can't train ourselves to take off our white lens in one webinar by any means, but we can use this as a framework to try to be aware of that lens and to make a deliberate choice to put on anti-racist lenses to help us seek out racism, not wait for it to make itself known, but look for it deliberately, actively, and correct in our practices, in our curriculum, in our classrooms, in our schools, to look for it. And the opportunities are plentiful all around us in all of the places that we work. It doesn't need to be a Black History Month. It doesn't need to be a service learning trip. It's every day. And in fact, the racism in your own context is the kind that you're best positioned to confront and influence. So we often, again, we externalize, it makes it more comfortable for us, but it is around you. And this is actually the place where you have leverage to make a change, is where you already are. So to sum up, we've talked about the myth of the good-bad binary and how this contributes to white discomfort when talking about race, and why we're so reluctant to acknowledge racism in our own international schools. This discomfort perpetuates an adherence to racism, which white people are often desensitized to, even though we benefit from and participate in it. We've examined privilege and marginalization in our own context and talked about how the layers of marginalization interact and compound just to make more discrimination. And we've reinforced the need to commit to actively using anti-racist lenses to seek out and correct racism where we live and work. And I will provide you with some excellent resources on how to do this in a moment. But I want to finish with a reminder that anti-racism is a daily practice. So while the metaphor is not perfect, again, an example that I can relate to in my everyday life is veganism. I'm vegan, but I did not call myself vegan because I tried a vegan restaurant once, or because I bought a vegan cookbook, or because I attended a vegan webinar. I'm vegan because I wake up every morning and make deliberate choices throughout the day to be vegan. It impacts where I shop, what I eat, what I wear. It can be uncomfortable sometimes when I have to tell people I can't eat the thing that they made me as a meal. I've been hungry before because I didn't have options. But it is a daily intentional practice. And I am nowhere near as good an anti-racist as I am a vegan, because I think racism hides much, much, much more between the cracks than animal products. And I am still very, very on a learning journey there, and exercising humility around my own anti-racism. But I have made a long-term commitment to continue to try to get better at this and to make sure I do it daily. It is not an event, it's a daily practice. So I promised resources. This is a curated list that I created based off of a lot of people of color have been saying for a long time what we can do in our schools. I didn't feel the need to recreate any of that, but I'm amplifying here some of those voices. And I can tell you, if you're feeling motivated, this is a list that I feel really confident. And if Kevin, can I share this through you? Okay, so I'll share these slides through Kevin, and I feel really confident if you click on virtually any one of these links, it will take you to a place where concrete ideas can do today and tomorrow and the next day and the next day and the next day. There are, I think, in here 2 petitions. So feel free to sign the petitions, but also once you've signed them, look at the content and how can you work toward applying that content. The AIELOC petition, for example, you don't just sign it, then you start to implement it. Paul Gorski writes about pacing for privilege. That means pacing anti-racist work in schools in a way that prioritizes the comfort and interests of people with privilege over progress toward equity. So I challenge you to push through that discomfort and to hold a higher standard of anti-racism for yourself and for your school. These are the references I used in the talk, and this is how to connect with me. I'm on Twitter, and I have a website, which you can also reach me through email on the website. I do consulting mainly on gender and sexual diversity inclusion, but always through an intersectional lens, because we can't truly work toward equity unless we consider all of those elements. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Emily. And if anyone has any questions, if you want to type in the chat or unmute, let us know. We'll look out for those. Any questions, we'll watch out for them in the chat. Or you can unmute and ask.
I have a quick question. This is Alexandra Berry. I was just curious to know when you think the recording might be available. I'm from the International School Manila, and I think that a lot of the information that you shared could be super beneficial, not only for faculty and admin, but even our students. I think a lot of this information could be really helpful for them. So I'm really happy that I was able to attend today. Thank you, Emily and Kevin, and I think her name was Brittany. But hopefully we'll be able to get a recording of this as well, and I was just curious to know.
Definitely, yeah, that'll come after. So you attended the end of June, when that'll be out soon. We put all the recordings up on the TIE online on their YouTube station. And so the recording, the slides, and any of the follow-up resources, the links will be sent out. So that'll be sent out via email, as long as you register. If you register, you'll get it.
Wonderful, thank you.
Awesome, definitely. Any other questions? Don't be shy. Thank you all.
Maybe I'll ask one. Like, in our group, we were discussing how uncomfortable it can be for both sides to try to advocate for anti-racism policies at school, or approaches from the side of people who have more privilege. And I was saying from my own side, that I am new to advocating for inclusion and diversity. Because you mentioned it, Emily, that feeling of being seen as self-serving. So when I post something like, oh, I don't want pictures on the CVs and things like that, I feel like, well, she's only saying that because it will benefit her personally. And that is my inner critic talking to me. How do I get out of it?
Fanny, I am in the position of privilege where I don't know the answer to that because I don't have that problem. I think right now there is definitely more of an appetite now than ever before. Schools are reaching out and saying, okay, we're ready, what do we need to do? So if you have those ideas about, the pictures on the CV or whatever it may be, I think now more than ever, it is more available to you. But I don't know your context, and racism is real, and so I don't know how receptive your administrators will be. This is sort of why I do speak to white accountability, because it should not be incumbent on people of color to do all of the work on their own. White people created and we perpetuate this problem, and it really should be our job to correct it. So I feel for you. I don't know if any people of color have want to chime in and offer some suggestions for Fandy if you run into this and found a solution that you can share with her.
I'll hop in real quick. So our next webinar, glad Fandy said that, our discussion will be on the 22nd of July. It'll be a little bit earlier because we're getting from folks from different parts of the world. It's going to be at 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, but it's called Call Us Into Action. And the topic is going to address this. So how do you get, and it'll be a range of we're trying to get sort of young people, so scholars, alumni, to people who are working in international schools, so people who have had those conversations of, calling in individuals that they work alongside to start those, conversations of what we need to do and having self-checks and self-awareness. So part of that is, what's that process? What does it look like? How do you feel, in terms of feeling uncomfortable? I just had sent a note this morning to someone before I jumped on this webinar about a conference that was sort of slated around, and I posted in our affinity group, around national and international speakers, but they all looked a certain way, and again, I think we have to be, going back to what Emily said, it's a daily practice, and it's a journey. So it's, as you see those things that, you sort of sense and you feel, should it, because again, you come and get to that point where you're like, should I say something? And for me, I just say something, because what's it gonna, hurt? So if I see something or I hear something, it's like being willing to confront it, similar to we talked through this Dina Simmons article the last time. But if you see it, you hear it, you have to say something, you have to speak up, because otherwise it's perpetuated. So.
Emily, I was I was thinking while we were talking. This is Annette.
Hi,
how are you?
Great.
Emily, we're in this. I find it a unique position where schools have to rethink what they're doing, and they have to rethink how they're doing it. I think as a result, too many schools aren't they're not really even though it's in the media, it's in our faces, Black Lives Matter and all of this. I don't know that schools of privilege, schools filled with predominantly white folks, are really thinking about that and how they can do it. But I wonder if we can, somehow develop some online youth sources, middle, high school, even elementary age, for students, so that instructors can implement them into some of their online learning that they have to do, even if it's just small little snippets, to see if we can bring this to the forefront. At the same time, find new and different ways to teach the curriculum.
Yeah, actually, there's a lot of webinars these days, and I attended one yesterday with Dolene Mana, who's actually here today as well. She's at the International School of Luxembourg, and she was talking about how some of the change that has been implemented at her school, or that they're calling for, was actually student initiated and student led. And so certainly the kids have lots of ideas. I don't know if there's a if anybody else has resources about how to support student-led initiatives, because I do think, you know, they've got lots of ideas and they might just require our support. If anybody has any particular recommendations for that, feel free to share. If it's not coming from, you know, from faculty and leadership.
Yes, hello, do you mind, is it okay if I say something?
Yeah.
I'm here on behalf of Decolonize IB, although we're probably going to change our name to OTIS, Organization to Decolonize International Schools, or something like that. And so we represent students and alumni, so we've created and we're expanding every day our database. We actually had like a shocking boom of followers in the past few days. So if you want to get people in touch with student and alumni groups, come to us. We have the database. We're trying to amass all that information. So, turn my video off. Hello. So we're the people to contact. We're the kids. And if you could get us in touch actually with the the student movement in the International School of Luxembourg, that would be very interesting for us, because we have mainly contacts in East Asia, and we've got a lot more popping up in certain parts of Africa and Western Europe. We're looking for student groups in Latin America. And,
okay, yeah, I can connect you to Jolene. She's on here, but I know she's also, like, she's multitasking right now. Mm-hmm. But that's great. Yes, Decolonize IB. I actually have you in the resource list.
Mm-hmm.
So
lovely.
Yeah. So that's great. I didn't realize how much it was student driven though. So I've been following you,
mm-hmm.
but I didn't realize it was so student led. So that's fantastic.
Well, and alumni, but yeah.
Alum. Okay, great. What's the best way to? Oh, let's see.
And I just added the.
Hi everyone.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Jolene, is that you?
Yeah, that's me.
Okay. Do you want?
Sorry. I was just thinking to maybe share quickly what we've done. It's not too long, but so a couple of years ago now, 3 years, we've started a TED group, and the focus of the group or the club is really to create a culture of vulnerability where students are comfortable with the uncomfortable. And it goes from mental health, anxiety, depression, all these things that students struggle with. So we've been working with it for the last 3 years. And I think this culture they're starting to get it. So when this whole incident with racism started with George Floyd, so immediately, because they are now used to, tackle difficult conversations and do something about it. So they contact me and they say, we have to do something, we have to talk about it. And they were aware that it was uncomfortable, but they were sort of trained to talk about things like that. So they put together a webinar where they approach our teachers of color and ask them to share their stories live on a webinar, which was fantastic. Yeah. And as a result, I think it's something that really touched the entire community, and they realized that it was very close, that it wasn't anymore something that is in the United States, but it was home with their colleagues, people they work with every day. And there was a shift that really happened, but it's all student driven, and it's all about creating that culture of vulnerability where we talk about the uncomfortable. So I think that's why it was successful. Yeah.
Great. A really good model to follow if you're looking for ways to involve students, for sure. And I also saw one of the comments a comment about how we've got community members too who are beyond faculty and students, but parents and other stakeholders who are also pushing for change. I mean, there's definitely, I think, school leadership is feeling external pressure more and more these days too, and we've got other community members we can involve in this progress. So it's great. Draw on everyone we can.
All right, are there any other questions? And again, we'll send the slides, we'll send the resources that are in the chat, and we will send the recording to everyone. If you attended the one end of June, that'll come soon. So it'll be a link on TIE's YouTube. Again, thanks everyone for joining us.